Right, so I'm here today with Dr. Richard Searle, a AI extraordinaire, and that, we're just in the San Francisco sun, decided to have a conversation about PQC, PKI, AI, and anything else, really.
Yeah, great to be here, Todd. Thanks for inviting me to have a chat.
Yeah, no worries. First topic, I guess, is really, we're keeping this casual, so, what are your current sort of thoughts about the way AI is heading? There's a lot of stuff in the news, a lot of, I guess, marketing going out there. It's kind of hard to cut through the corporate lens that gets pushed out to people. What are your thoughts about AI and where it's all going?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question to kick off with. I had an interesting meeting this morning, and somebody described the AI environment as frothy.
Oh, right.
And I thought that was a good word. And what they were referring to there is that obviously there's a lot of money, particularly in this environment here, being pumped into startups and new ideas around AI with a fear of missing out, right? If you've got capital, you want to be in the AI bubble. You can't afford to take the risk of missing it. But I think from the outside perspective, the difficult thing is trying to sort the wheat from the chaff. What is actually a constructive use of AI? What's doing a productive thing that has a market and a base to build a business? And what is effectively jumping on the bandwagon and effectively applying AI that's off the shelf in order to, just try and muscle in on the dynamics of the market? And then there's also the question of whether the application of generative AI at the moment, and there was an interesting piece published, I think, by JP Morgan just yesterday before we're having this chat about the risks associated with the way people are deploying AI, particularly in a security domain, which you and I are very interested in. How can you actually be sure whether that AI is going to be a risk to your business or contribute to the bottom line and build something? So it's a challenge. And, I think anybody that says they have the answer to that or a crystal ball is probably misleading you. I think it's something we have to watch very carefully within the security industry in particular. And also, I think probably in the same way we've seen it with other changes in the way we use information technology, we're going to see a reckoning around, what the actual value of this is. And then the real stuff will come out in the future, and we'll understand a bit more about how we're going to use it and apply it and what is the true value proposition.
Great. I see. Interesting. So one of the things we've picked up being here is sort of the angle of AI and large language models being used for sort of nefarious purposes, for trying to break security and things like that. And a reoccurring theme in some of the topics we've seen is around robustness, around the AI's own internal sort of robustness around security and that. But what are your thoughts around the security aspect of the actual sort of LLMs themselves?
Yes, I mean, something I became really quite concerned about 12 months ago was, with generative AI had been around in mid-2024 for, let's say, 18 months since, some of the really big hitting papers and launches happened. And everybody was talking about using generative AI and large language models in particular within particularly their security operations centers. And I worry about that. I worry about that because I think it encourages dependency on the technology. The human factor takes a step back and says, we've got this tool doing something, but we don't really understand how that tool's doing it. And secondly, there is the potential for corruption of that tool, potentially through data poisoning, drift. Drift is probably the biggest issue just in terms of divergence from what you're intending to look at. And of course, the other thing is, in that environment, there's a concentration of risk. And I think, when people are looking at some of the applications of the technology in the security domain for whatever it's doing, you need to think very carefully about what happens if it goes wrong. And also, like all software, what is the supply chain behind it and how secure is it? How secure is the stuff doing my security? And you could argue that human factors make, the deployment of security professionals, that carries with it some risk. But the bottom line is that the risk is probably not as concentrated as it is with the piece of software that you might be deploying to solve all your problems. So, I might be a bit of a industrial heretic there, but that's how I see it at the moment. I worry. I think, and the other thing I worry about is that I think somebody is going to get caught with their pants down when it goes wrong.
Yeah.
And then everyone will say, oh yeah, we see it now. But by then it's too late for that somebody. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a bit unfortunate. I think you're right. I think that point in time will come. And it's almost like repeating the cycle. Every time a new bit of technology comes out, there's early adopters, it ramps up, and everyone thinks about security as a last minute thought, and then something bad happens, and then we go, oh, all right, there it is.
Yeah.
We need to start, retrospectively shoehorning in all those good things we should have had at the start, which we knew we should. So
yeah, there'll be plenty of people saying, I told you so. I worry about that, because I think that the problem is that, what those sorts of things do is they actually undermine the true value of using some of this stuff. It's undoubtedly valuable for doing, that mundane record processing and things potentially, but, not all AI is generative AI. We know that. And the other thing is you need to make sure that, your dependency on that doesn't actually exacerbate your risk rather than reduce it. That's one for the risk professionals to ponder, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll leave it to them.
Exactly.
Well, speaking of risk, probably a good segue into what would your thoughts be about post-quantum and post-quantum computers turning up and PQC algorithms and all of that good stuff. The other sort of hot topic, it's like AI and PQC.
Yeah, so again, last year, 2024 was an interesting year because, the joke has always been that quantum computers were 10 years away, and every year they were still 10 years away. And last year, people, for example, like Gartner, started quantifying when they expected a computer with the capability, at least, to be cryptanalytically relevant, the thing we all worry about. And they said, towards the end of this decade, 2029 to 2032, that's when we're likely to see that capability. And I think that's informed by some of the technical developments that we've seen published by people like Google, people like Microsoft recently with their Majorana processor, but also some of the developments in the connectivity and the infrastructure to support quantum computers. And so, I think that the whole post-quantum cryptography thing is relevant and important now because people get it. Obviously, that's been a big focus of a lot of the work I've done recently. And, we saw the publication of standards by NIST last year, so it's now a real thing. You can use it, you can put it into practice, you can be compliant with it. But I think there are also challenges in terms of what quantum computation means for, again, security in particular, how we're going to process information. It's an untrusted, centralized resource like the cloud was in its early days.
Yeah.
It's a different type of computer because potentially it's the kind of computational resource that can attack cryptography. And again, our PQC cryptographic standards are the ones that we know today. It might be that they're found to be flawed down the line. It might be that they're found to be inefficient, and we looked at different ways. And also the application of new AI methods on quantum computers might reveal different mathematical attacks that we as humans can't imagine. And, I'm particularly interested in some of the developments we've seen in the robotics domain, training robots to perform tasks where the way that's optimal for those robots is, and the design of things as simple as car parts. Right? They're designed in ways that no human would imagine to do that. And so potentially we might find and discover new attacks that confound that PQC environment. And so I think it's incumbent on providers in that space and people adopting it to keep a very close eye on it. The other big problem, with PQC as a transition is a lot of people get focused on the maths and the cryptography and the standards. It's an industry change process. Yeah. And it's not one you can do on your own. It's not something that a company can say, right, we're going to move to a PQC environment and we're going to do it by this date to be compliant. It affects your vertical and your horizontal supply chain. It affects your industry domain. And so I think a lot of people haven't really reckoned with the challenge that presents within the timescales that they're expected to achieve that by. That's a big challenge.
Yeah, we see that with customers or potential customers. You have that PQC conversation, right. And we give them advice, and as soon as you start touching on the breadth and the depth of the problem, they are like, it's sort of a light bulb moment.
Yeah.
Or other type of moment. But they know it's coming up.
The problem is as well that, there are still standardization processes that are not there to support that change. And you're seeing potentially different PQC standards in the civilian domain compared to the government domain, and between different geographic regions. For example, there's a lot of focus in Europe. Germany's looking at different studies. So how are you going to harmonize those? How are you going to ensure compliance wherever you're operating? Because we know that information and goods transfer globally nowadays. It's not, an environment where you can be insular about this. I think those are the kinds of challenges that the people within companies charged with achieving this transition really need to be grappling with, like now, today.
Yeah, so we quite have a conversation. We obviously stay vendor agnostic, and all the vendors we speak to, we're putting this, PQC functionality in our product. We meet the NIST standards, and I'm like, well, that's great, but what if I've got a German customer that needs to adhere to the BSI standards, and there's algorithms there that aren't in the NIST standards? There's no overlap. Are you going to put that in your product? Are you going to force? What do I say to my customer and that sort of thing? So we see this similar stuff, really.
Yeah, I mean, so, as what that means is that the order of complexity of this change just blows up exponentially in terms of who you're working with. And as we know, security is really undermined by the weakest link in the chain. And how are you going to validate that, you have a secure end-to-end cryptographic process, and some information that's encrypted with PQC isn't then going to be used with a legacy algorithm elsewhere in the supply chain, defeating the whole purpose of that transition. It's a huge undertaking for, global industry. It doesn't matter what you're doing. And I think that's the point that's been missed, with a lot of focus on standards and algorithms and math and competitions. And, that's interesting for the crypto nerds, but the real problem is a business change problem.
Yeah, definitely a business change problem. One of the things we sort of, when we speak to go and consult with businesses, potential customers, we're talking at that sort of higher management level. It's like, oh, this PQC is coming along, all these products, they'll just fix it. It'll be one-to-one. It's like, no, it's not a one-to-one change. There is no just, rip and replace. It's, like you said, the complexity explodes exponentially. Just even something which would previously be kind of minor. I have system A here, I'm going to upgrade it, replace it with system B. It's just not like that anymore.
Yeah, and I think the other problem is that, it depends what your industry domain is. I mean, we know it, operational technology, for example, there's a lot of devices that are just never going to be able to support PQC standards. So you don't just have the problem of transitioning the cryptography, you've got to think about the whole technology refresh and the investment impact of that. These are things that, investment committees take years to sort of establish. And these are things that haven't really been talked about. I know that there are some people I talk to in the industry that think the same way. I've done a lot of communications with them over the last couple of years, but I think, that's something that as a whole is being missed. And like you said, when you say to somebody, what is the net impact of your PQC transition? And you go through all of the places that it's going to touch and all of the processes, but then you get that light bulb moment and people start to worry. I think it's going to be a big challenge to achieve a PQC transition by the dates that various jurisdictions have set for that transition to happen by. I mean, it's 2025 now, right? And it's heading into the summer. The year's nearly half over. Time passes.
Yeah, far too quickly, unfortunately. And we find that as well. It's like, it's 2030. We're still in 2025. Well, yes, you are, but 5 years can disappear pretty rapidly, especially if you're not being more proactive and planning for that transition and things like that. Yeah, so what you touched on before about the operational technology and things like that, it brought up a, more, not so long ago, example of where if I've got an IoT device out there, it doesn't have enough power to create enough entropy to give me good quality keys. With the existing classical crypto we've got, how on earth will I ever get it to be, upgraded to be PQC sort of compliant, things like that. And so it's just like you say, one of those things that no one's really thought about in depth, and when they do, there's that light bulb moment.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you may well have to re-architect some of the systems that depend on cryptography to protect data and protect machines. And ultimately to protect people, right?
Yeah.
Thinking about those sort of branches of where cryptography touches and, what needs to be accomplished, as well as the whole issue of, where that cryptography is going to be deployed and which vendors you're going to use, whether those vendors can support that. They provide the crypto agility, as the phrase du jour.
It is indeed.
That's a big challenge for people. So, yeah, I think, look, I see positive signs in terms of industry collectives like the PKI Consortium, for example, that are communicating the message and collaborating, and work that's going on within things like the IETF, to try and enable the change. But I think in terms of the timescales, that effort needs to ramp fairly rapidly. And I also know that, there are some potential disagreements between various agencies that would want certain standards like CNSA 2.0, for example, compared to the practical and pragmatic implications of deploying this within the civilian domain, and that some of those conflicts need to be resolved based on, early indicators of things like performance, like you said, the ability of systems to support them. It's going to be a big challenge.
Yes, indeed. I'm quite pleased we're in the PKI. It's
busy times ahead.
Busy times ahead. And I'd like to close off with thank you for your time and the sort of casual conversation in the sun. It's been really, really good.
It's been very pleasant, and appreciate you inviting me to have a talk today. Thanks for inviting me along.
All right. So it's still almost to